Good morning, how are you? Update time. I've been working on the Rotary Willys quite a bit and have made quite a bit of progress, so let me show you what I've done. With any swap, it's always exciting when you can take the engine hoist out and the engine supports itself in the frame, and that's where we're at today. So that means motor mounts and transmission mounts are done. So wasn't too complicated with the Rotary because it's more of a conventional rear-wheel drive setup as opposed to the front-wheel drive engine I put in that Jeep. So I used the stock studs on the side of the block. There's 3 of them on this side, and adapted that to a bracket on the frame. I had to cut the Willys mounts off. You can see where they were. And everything's just kind of tacked in. I got to pull the engine out and fully weld everything. I'm using the Dasher Volkswagen Audi mounts, the same ones I use on the TDI. So that's the driver's side mount. And you can see the steering box just clears. It's always a challenge on an engine swap with stock steering. And the bell crank has plenty of room. Just had to cut that bracket off a little bit. So you can see just how far forward I had to move the engine. It's pretty much right in line with the cross member. So the radiator is going to have to sit right inside the grill. And then on the other side, the 13B uses a goofy style engine mount. It's difficult to show you, but one of the bolts actually goes through the oil pan, the rearmost bolt here. So that's a sealing bolt. There's like silicone or a gasket around it. Then I had to come out with another bracket and the same style mount like I used on the other side. So that's it for the motor mounts. This engine is super light. I'm going to try to weigh it before it goes in for the final time, and I'll weigh this as well and get a comparison. So this isn't like my Cummins swap where it weighed 1,200 pounds, you know, and makes 600 foot-pounds of torque. So the mounts, these will be more than strong enough for this purpose. And here's where everything lands on the inside. So some people were asking about the shifter location. The stock 4-speed came out about right here, and the shifter came back to about there. So even though this seems like it's far back, it's actually going to be just fine. All I have to do is I'm going to extend it and kind of try to make it look like a stock Jeep shifter. And then the transfer case shifters come forward at a slight angle right about there. So I'll design and fabricate some shifters for that and make a trans cover. This hole was for the PTO, and you can see that's the back of the transfer case. So it actually comes out extremely close to where the Spicer 18 PTO was, because that would have been about right here, and then the shifter came up through the middle. So that kind of gives you an idea just how similar the length of this and the position is set up compared to the 4-speed. Now let's talk a little bit about the mounting. In the first video I talked about the divorce transfer case and why I chose that. Now let me show you how I mounted it. As you know, in a conventional transfer case, it mounts either directly to the transmission or to some sort of adapter like this, where there's a sealing surface, a bearing, and a drive gear that attaches to an output shaft. And that's not at all what we're doing with the divorce setup. This is what the back of the RX-7 transmission looks like. So this is just a little 5-speed with a slip yoke, and the output shaft is right here. So inside this housing, it's basically just a hollow housing. It's where the transmission mount is, and it holds the tail shaft. So there's a brass bushing or bronze bushing. It's about 2 inches long right back here. The spline shaft, the bearings all the way up here. There's a shaft and a big counterweight. So that's all that's inside there. So you can see this shifter assembly protrudes back past the spline. So that won't work for me. So on the transmission, I'll show you later when I take it out, the transmission that's in the Willys, I removed this housing, shortened the shifter shaft, cut this off. So now the back of this shifter housing is in front of the output of the transmission. So I moved my shifter forward about 4 inches. Then I made this little guy. So this is the Samurai drive shaft flange. This would have had U-joint caps on it. I cut it off. This is an RX-7 drive shaft slip yoke. So I cut that off. I machined these two. I heated this up, cooled this down, pressed them together, and TIG welded it. So this is a very strong, simple little piece. I then put it in my lathe as I welded it, I actually welded it in the lathe and made sure this face is perfect, flat this way, and also concentric, so these two pieces aren't in misalignment. So then all I'm going to do is slide this fella in there. Like I said, we move the shifter forward, bolt the transfer case up to this. The beauty of this slip yoke is that it is very forgiving in and out. So I don't have to worry about thrust or preload, if you want to call it, on this axis in and out, because this has like 3 inches of sliding. So it would drive it fine there, and it'd also drive it fine there. So we're going to come as short as we can while still allowing a little movement. Put the transfer case on here, and I have built a cradle that holds it all together. One of the most common questions I'm getting is, or more of a statement, people are telling me, you can't do that. The transmission transfer case will move separately and blow out that tail shaft. That would be true if you mounted the transfer case conventionally. In a divorced setup, I'll put a picture on here, you would have the transfer case mounted here, transmission mounted here, and they're allowed to move like independently of each other as the load comes on and off the engine. In order to make this setup work, I need to mate the two together, more like the one I took out where they're bolted right to the transmission, and mount it in a way that when the load comes on the engine, they move together. So if I can keep them lined up perfectly, concentric, like I did with my diesel engine adapter, and let them move together, nothing's going to break. Anything mechanical can fail, but the likelihood is very slim. So I know a lot of you still won't believe me, and that's okay. Follow the videos. If it blows up, I will post carnage, and if it doesn't, I'll post driving videos. It's a little hard to see from this view, so I'm going to pull the engine out. I have to weld these motor mounts and do a couple other things. So I'm going to stop the video here, take a moment, remove everything, and then I'll show you the cradle I built, because the transfer case, it's already in there. Can't see it, but I'll show you what I came up with.